Hi, and welcome to another educational session. On this session, I'm going to give you an introduction to skeleton or schematic Roman capitals. Let's zoom in. Okay, so I'm going to be using this guideline for the video, but if you joined my course called Introduction to Foundational Hand, you're actually going to be able to download a set of specific blank calligraphy guidelines for schematic Roman capitals. In here, I'm going to explain what this scale is about, and then we will talk about the characteristics of this type of alphabet, which is 2000 years old, actually more than that currently. So let's go. In here, you have a blank calligraphy guideline that is made out of a specific scale. So for today's session, I'm going to be using a Brause nib, 3 millimeters, but you can also totally follow me with a pilot parallel pen, 3 millimeters, or with any other tool that works for you. The scale of this writing currently is made out of 4 widths of my own pen, 4 lowercase letters, and 2.5 widths of my own writing pen for ascenders and cap height, and 2.5 for descenders or for descenders in the lowercase. Now, because today we are going to be focused on capitals, I'm only going to be worried about this section, which is the X height plus the cap height. And I'm going to explain what are the main characteristics of this type of capitals. Now, if you need to download this exact set of calligraphy guidelines, you are able to download it for free by signing up on my newsletters. And once you do that, you'll receive an automatic email with a PDF file. In that PDF file, you can actually find recommended materials as well for different calligraphy styles. So now what I'm doing is I'm going to attach the guideline and the paper. Now, what you see at the moment in here, let's zoom out. It's another session I delivered on an introduction to modern Carolingian, which, as you can see, is the basis of our current Roman lowercase letter forms. So this modern Carolingian alphabet, which belongs to the lowercase, and now this introduction to Roman capitals are the two parts of my introduction to foundational hand course, which is going to give a very good solid foundation and analysis on our current Latin, lowercase and uppercase. So let's go. Okay, so you see at the top the lowercase, and now we are going to talk about Roman caps. So for Roman caps, of course, I'm not going to be looking at the X height, so I'm actually going to move slightly more the paper up. Let's go. Yeah. And I'm going to be basting here. So this is my X height, which is 4 times my writing tool. And now I'm going to also use 2.5 times my writing tool. So of course, it's a total of 6.5 widths of my own pen. And this is the proportions I'm going to use for the schematic or skeleton Roman caps. Now, what is the most important characteristic of Roman capitals? It's called old style proportions. And what does that mean? Well, if you Google the Trajan Column, it's something that happened a long time ago. It's a Roman inscription, and the letters that were carved on a stone a long time ago, 2000 years plus ago, are the grandmothers of our current capital letters in the Latin alphabet. So all the style proportions mean that we are going to find 3 very distinctive groups of widths. So there are some capital letters that are going to be part of the first group, which is called 1 to 1. That means the width and the height are very, very similar, almost the same. The second group, it's called 1 to 2, meaning the base or the width is half of the height. And the third group is 4 to 5, meaning the width is slightly narrower than the height. And based on these proportions, all these set of letter forms that are inside of each group are going to more or less follow these proportions. There are a couple of exceptions, for example, the letter W, just because at that time, you won't find a letter W in a 2,000-year-old Roman inscription. So this is a more modern, nice appearance in the history of the alphabet. But except a few exceptions, every other letter of the alphabet are going to fit in one of these three categories. Now, let's do an example. So what it means one-to-one. So we are going to do this by eye. But as I mentioned before, if you join the course, you will have guidelines where I'm providing you with squares that are a very good reference for starting out. Of course, once you are then writing a text, this won't work, but this will work and will be very helpful to start with because you have a clear measurement. So let's do it by eye now. I'm going to create a frame that is roughly, and it's roughly because I'm not going to measure it. I'm just going to do it by eye. I'm going to eyeball it. That is the same width as the same height. I don't know if it is exactly, but I'm just trying to do and adjust the area optically. In this group, we encounter letters like letter O, for example, capital O. So let's do a trial. If you watch my introduction to Foundational Hand with the lowercase explanations in here, you will already know what I'm going to do with the letter O, but I will repeat it in here again. So the scale is bigger, so the letter form is now larger. I'm going to be using an angle of 30 degrees, which is the same one as Carolingian in the lowercase. And I'm not going to start my 30 degrees at the very top of the square. I'm going to start at the corner and slightly in, as you can see by the position. I'm going to bring a paper to protect. Excellent. So my pen is roughly positioned at 30 degrees. And then the first movement I'm going to do is I'm going to go slightly towards the left, slightly overshooting on the baseline and going up again. This movement, I try to create the movement by not rotating my pen as I'm going around. I try to keep a consistent angle. This is a very good trick to start for beginners. Of course, if we have more practice, then there are further pen manipulations we can do, but at this point it's very important that we just understand the pen angle that we need to use and create a smooth round stroke. Once we have that, I'm going to position the pen on the same starting point, and this time I'm going to go up and keep rounding down and closing my letter O. Now, when you hear calligraphers talk about the axis, it's basically where is the line between the thick part of your letter form. It's this. So you can see that the axis of the letter form is actually oblique. And it happens because of the 30 degrees that I start, I move around and I finish, and the second stroke on the other side. The beauty of that is that I would like to keep a counter form that is quite similar between the two sides. In this case, is not exactly the same, but it's okay. It's similar enough, so I'm okay at the moment with that. That's going to be my capital O, and it's roughly 1 by 1, so the width and the height are very similar. In this category, we have other letters like letter G, letter D, and letter C, and so forth. Okay. Second. So the second category, I'm going to go around here. It's going to be the category of 1 to 2. So 1 to 2 means that the height is twice as big as the width. And in here, I'm gonna eyeball as well, and maybe around there. So you can see that the width is, of course, in theory, because in here I'm just doing it by eye, half of the height. And so in this category, so that would be width 1 and height 2, which is double. In this category, we have many letters like the E, the L, the B, and so forth. So I'm going to start with letter E, for example, capital E. So again, I will use the same 30 degrees I have used in here. And starting again, not at the very corner, but just slightly below. And from here, okay, 30 degrees and then down, stop, and to the right, stop, and then from the top, stop, and then I have to look for the optical center. So visually, what I think that it will appear to be the vertical center, and finish. If you actually Google Trajan Column and you see the letter forms, you will see that these letter forms have further details, which are the serifs. And that is why what I'm explaining here, it's called skeleton or schematic Roman capitals, because it's writing the skeleton of the letters, as if I'm taking an X-ray of the letter forms without including the serifs or the small details at the end of the letter forms. In here, I tried to create, I created first the stroke and then to the right, second stroke. So number 1, I'll use a different pen for the order of the strokes, number 2 and number 3. What I'm trying to create in here is 2 counterforms that are similar, although I know that if I turn this letter upside down, which I will show you at the end, the bottom counterform is going to be larger than the top. And this is to compensate an optical illusion that we all humans have, which is that the top halves of everything look apparently bigger. So to compensate that, I need to place the bar just slightly higher than what it should be, the geometrical or mathematical center. Okay? Then we have the 4 to 5. So again, I'm gonna do the measure by eye. And so I know that now the width is slightly narrower than the height. So maybe around there. Maybe around there. Okay, so that means the height is 5 and the width is 4, and I have to obviously get a measurement that is gonna be narrower than that, but because that will correspond to 1 to 1. Now, the letter I'm going to create, for example, is capital H, and I will start with a 30 degrees position, pen position, and then I will go down for the first stroke. Again, I'm going to look for the optical center, and now with the same pen positioning of 30 degrees, I'm pushing to the right. And then as a third stroke, I have from the top to the bottom and down. Letter H is one of the letter forms that appears larger than what we would intuitively do, because it has larger proportions that normally our handwriting creating or writing a capital letter. So that's my first stroke, that was the second stroke, and that was the third stroke. And again, now we will turn this around to examine the counterforms and the distribution. So in here we have first stroke and second stroke. So based on these 3 proportions, we are going to encounter that all the other capital letters will follow one of these groups. And when placed together, they create a really dynamic rhythm based on the differences between the widths. This is very different to this is very different to a lot of sans serif fonts, which sometimes you will call them like Gothic fonts, not Gothic, grotesques. now, grotesques, such as Helvetica and so forth. And so with an Helvetica, for example, you will find that the capitals are the same width, but with a futura, which is also a sans and a geometric sans, but this time has this flavor and inheritance from a humanistic font. It will maintain the three different groups of letters. So even in designs that might look super contemporary, even in designs that are sans, you are still going to find some heritage of this type of old style proportions. So depending on the heritage of the font, the capitals will be very similar in width or will be very, very different in widths, depending on what their flavor and their heritage is. Now, let's have a look. Okay. So if I turn now the paper around and we have a look at the counterforms here, you can see quite easily now that the top counterform of capital E is much smaller and the bottom quite large, and the H has the same distribution of spaces. But if I turn this around, actually this is not so clear and visible. It's not so apparent because of this optical illusion. So this is an introduction to schematic or skeleton Roman capitals, and you can find all this information and the entire alphabet explained and a very good historical presentation about both alphabets on my course called Introduction to Foundational Hand. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again soon.